Money doesn't just come from one place. It drips, trickles, flows, and floods into our lives in different ways. Welcome to Drip, Trickle, Flow, Flood, a podcast that explores the power of multiple income streams. And today we are so excited because we have our very first guest. So I'm going to go ahead and pass the mic to Tony, who's going to do the honors and introduce her.
Yeah, I'm really excited today. We have Ria Van Weerdhuizen with us. Ria is a local banker. We're going to talk about why it's important to have a local banker, what a local banker can do for you. But we're also going to get into some of Ria's story. And full disclosure here, Ria is my local banker. I'm sure we'll talk about it a little further into the podcast, but Ria and I have been working together for a long time, and she's been a great partner in my journey. So, Ria, thank you so much for being here.
Thanks for having me. I'm so excited to be on the podcast.
And I want everybody to know that Ria has been listening.
Thank you, Ria.
Yeah, absolutely. Every week, taking notes, trying to put into action some of the little tidbits. So I really appreciate that you guys are normalizing what it looks like to talk about financial futures and journeys and reflecting on where people came from, because we all don't have the same start and we're not all going to have the same finish. So I think it's great.
Yeah. So one thing I really wanted to get into from the start is, what's a local banker mean, right? There's banking commercials on TV all the time. There's a million ways to bank now. Why a local banker, and what kind of separates a local banker from one of the big national chains where maybe you never talk to a person?
Good question, Tony. And I've been in banking for almost 18 years now. So I've got to see the ebbs and flows of what the value of a local bank is through the Great Recession, 2008, from COVID, things like that. And I think one of the stories that just represents to me the importance of a local bank was during COVID. I had so many people calling up and just saying, hey, do you have any perspective on what's happening? And I would say, I have as much information as you do, but the minute that I hear something, I'll reach out. So I think that's one of the biggest values to having a local banker is they know you, they know your story, they know what you're looking for because you're having interactions with them. And so they can tailor kind of some of their recommendations, but also they can just be looking out for you and the resources that are provided in my community.
Yeah, I think that's great. For me, having that relationship with you and with other people at your bank, for me, it's one of those things that I have what I would consider a not traditional financial situation. Sometimes complex, sometimes confusing. Maybe sometimes I'm not on top of certain pieces as much as I should be. And you and the team that you formed that I worked with so much were always just such a part of my team. It was really helpful. There was just like somebody always looking out if a rental check didn't clear. If a rental check doesn't clear, people out there listening, I would get a letter in the mail a few days later saying this check didn't clear. If I was on it, checking my online banking regularly, maybe that's something I would have caught. But what would happen is, before I would ever catch it, before I would get the letter in the mail, Ria or somebody on her team would be calling me to let me know. And that's just one of those examples of having a real person and having someone that cares, understands what's going on. I always just found super valuable. So if you could talk a little bit about, what should someone be seeking out when they go to their bank? What kind of help can they get from you beyond maybe the obvious things, or even the obvious things?
Yeah, I love that you share that, Tony, because I think everyone thinks that they're unique, but also you're not that unique, right? You have a complex banking situation, but also at the same time, it's pretty typical for a small business owner and someone with multiple income streams. So I think if I were going to recommend to someone how they could leverage their community banker, the first thing is to just start talking to them about anything and everything, right? The things that we don't think are as important to mention could be really valuable for a community banker to share resources with, from you're looking to do a project on your house to you're really trying to consider how you could get a little bit more interest in your savings account to you've been receiving this fee in your checking account for a while. A lot of people assume that's just the way it's got to be, when in actuality, they can sit down with a banker and really talk about what's really important to you. And let's make sure that you're in the right product and that you have the, the knowledge or the information that you need. I think the other thing with community bankers is we can really help you with questions that maybe you need to bring to a tax advisor or an attorney or planning. I think, Tony, you and I have had a lot of those conversations about just, have you thought about this? Or are you taking advantage of that? Those are really valuable conversations for you to get started, and know that it takes a team. Yeah.
Well, I like that you mentioned the tax advisor or attorney and all those things, because you are building a financial team throughout your life, and the team may change a little bit and you might need different pieces at different times. But I like that idea of forming that team. And I do think going in and building a relationship with your local banker is a good place to start. They might be able to, direct you to some of those other people that will end up being on your team.
I love what you said as well. I know I've had several friends and clients and just other folks in my life. And I will say all of these folks I'm referring to are women that will share with me when they speak to a financial advisor or an accountant, oftentimes they feel talked down to and they felt embarrassed or dismissed or even afraid to go back and have these open conversations about what they might think is a complex issue around money. And so I'm curious if or how you deal with that. You have a very warm energy, which I think is amazing. And I'm sure people feel very open with you. But when you have people come in who maybe don't have that background of just feeling very open around speaking about money, is there anything that you do to open that window for them, make them feel a little bit more comfortable, make them feel empowered? I'd love to hear your thoughts on that.
Yeah, that's great. And I appreciate the comment on being approachable, because that's something I definitely want. I think for anyone out there that is having resistance to maybe asking more questions about the financials and things like that is a couple of things. Just normalizing. We talk this world all day, every day. So I realize that there's times when I go into jargon or some like higher level concept that I've had that conversation so many times that I forget that the other individual doesn't have that context. So just really empowering people to say, I love questions. I love when people say, wait, can you explain what that means? Or I don't know what that word is. Or if you were explaining this to someone else, could you explain it a different way? So just normalizing that a lot of these professionals don't realize what vibe they're giving off. And a lot of people just nod their heads, right? And so if you're nodding your head in my office, I'm going to assume you're along for the ride and you're with me, right? It's not until you ask a question that I realize, oh, I should back up and I should give you that context. So just normalizing, just asking questions is great. If you are really intimidated in these conversations, the other thing that's really helpful, I've seen a lot of people do it, is make a list. Make a list before you go in, before you even enter the institution, the branch, and say, okay, these are the 3 things that I need to understand, or these are the 3 things that I want to take away from this, or even a piece of paper that says, ask this person what questions I should be asking right now. Ask this person what I should know about this account. And I think that's where I admire Tony, is he is consistently having conversations. And so that means that he's practicing, he's getting verbiage. So I think people underutilize the events where they need to go into the bank and say, make a deposit, or they need to do a dispute. I think those are great opportunities to just say, oh, and also I want to ask about this $5 fee on this account, or I want to ask about this. Like, just really write down those questions when you have them and bring that piece of paper in, because any professional that you go to that sees that you have questions on a piece of paper is going to want to answer them for you. So
Good
I really
point.
just say normalize that it's typical to ask questions to clarify, and it's typical to like come prepared, be engaged, and take ownership of your financial journey. One way that I see people do this greatly is they keep track of what's happening in their account. I think a lot of times there's this, I don't know, this happened and I don't know when, and I don't know how much, and I don't know who it was, but I know there was a transaction that wasn't right. And the individuals that come in and say, on the 6th, this transaction happened and it doesn't seem right, They're going to move through the process faster. I've seen everything from people with elaborate spreadsheets to just like a one-page piece of paper, a journal that says on the 1st of every month, these payments come out. On the 15th of every month, these payments come out. I think that really empowers people when they're having those conversations because they know when things should be happening and they know the baseline of their finances.
So people are coming in, building these relationships. I want to speak a little bit to my personal situation with this relationship with the bank that you're at and how our relationship started. Ria started off as a teller,
As a
and
baby.
and as like a part-time teller. She would be there and then she'd vanish for a while, and she was like working at some youth camp in the summer, and then she would come back. And he and I have had conversations about all sorts of stuff outside of banking as well. And so we really got to know each other. And then she became the manager, or I guess assistant manager. And then she became the manager of the local branch that I went to. And she has since moved to a different branch. And her assistant manager is now the manager at the branch that I go to. However, the way that this relationship has grown, I know I can always reach out to Ria, although the person she put in that position is so good that I don't have to very often. But she's also connected me with other people at the bank. So I've gotten some commercial loans, and Ria goes, "That's not my area. Why don't you connect with this person and work with them?" And these relationships that I have built have allowed me to get into some other products and allowed the bank to portfolio some loans for me, which means they keep it in-house. So they extend a loan to me. And while a lot of banks or mortgage institutions, they create the loan, originate the loan, but then they sell it off. In this case, the bank takes my loan and actually keeps it in-house and carries it. And that just gives them more flexibility. They maybe could do loans on different properties. I have a thing where they've clustered some properties together for a loan situation. And these relationships really do build, and they can see a track record of Tony pays his bills on time. Tony always has money in his account, and he's doing these things. And so that confidence, I feel like, has gone a long ways. And it didn't happen overnight. This took decades, really. Maybe not quite that long. I've been established in this position for a while now, but it does take time to build that situation. So I do, as you're talking about, when people come in, yes, we want them to learn, but you're also building a relationship that can really be beneficial for your financial future. Can you talk about products that you actually have that, one, that what does the bank offer? And two, what should everybody have? What are the basics that everybody should have?
This is a great question, Tony. And probably you're going to hate my answer, but it depends. I can absolutely talk about some of the products, but I always look at banking on a spectrum. So some people really appreciate safety and stability, and other people are willing to take on a lot more risk. So that happens in a variety of ways. And the basic checking, savings, money market, CD, those are going to be your main venues to figure out cash flow and accessibility, right? I generally talk to people about those ones first. That's the entry level. I really recommend that parents bring their teenagers in. They start those accounts early so they understand how they work, so that they can ask questions. There's very specific products for teenagers so that the debit card limits aren't as high, or they can't use it at every single business, things like that are helpful. And that's where just your cash flow is going to happen, and your emergency fund, and the stability that you need in the bank. And then from there we can go into, if you're leveraging, so we could do home equity lines of credit, we can do mortgages, like purchases, refinances, things like that. And then from there, it goes into like business products, right? We'll do the same thing for a business that we do for personal. Like, how are you handling your cash flow? Checking account, savings account. Do you need that CD because you're a seasonal business? And then a full suite of treasury products, which treasury products sounds really fancy. Essentially, it's just, how do you move money in and out of your account, right? Like, how are customers paying you, and how are you paying customers or vendors? So we do that whole side of things too.
Let's dig into a couple of these things. So
Yeah,
let's start with the kids account.
let's do it.
Um, I know that yes, there's those things that maybe they can't spend as much, and there's those pieces, but there's also often higher interest rates available to a certain level for kids. Can you talk about that?
Yeah. So I think everyone would agree teaching kids to save early on is helpful for all involved, right? And so there's a lot of incentive towards whether it's the first 1,000 or the first 4,000 or so there's products like that for a youth savings account to be able to gain a little traction and get a little excitement from someone who is under 18 to incentivize them to put some money away for a rainy day.
And then can you talk about the difference between a CD and a money market?
Oh, yeah. So this all comes back to how accessible do you want these funds to be? So a lot of people, they don't care about accessibility. They just want highest rate. And in the conversation of highest rate, I always talk about what businesses do you want to do business with? Are you looking for the absolute highest rate or are you looking for stability? In our day and age, banks are being purchased, merged, acquired, shifting. There's a lot of online banks that maybe have the appearance of FDIC, but it's through a third institution. So I have that conversation with people. What is your accessibility need? If you're sitting down next to me and you're saying, in the next 6 months, I will probably need these funds, I'm going to say, probably not a CD then. If you're saying, a year, 2 years, I don't really need these funds, maybe consider a CD. Versus the money market, it's generally going to be pretty accessible in a situation of maybe 10 transactions per month, something like that. And it's generally going to be a tiered interest rate. So the more you keep in there, the higher the interest rate will be. But it really comes down between a CD and a money market, the accessibility.
We are throwing out a lot of terms and maybe some jargon right now.
Yeah.
If I just want to throw it out to the listeners, if there's something specific that you hear and you have a question about, please send a message to us and we can talk about some of this stuff in more depth. Obviously, there's the whole internet out there that you can also look things up as well. The one thing though I wanted, maybe you can mention what FDIC insurance is.
Oh, yeah. So the Federal Reserve insurance. So this is a situation that was put in place because people were keeping their money in banks, and if the bank went under, there was nothing to support them. So the government put this in place. So essentially, it's per institution, and that covers up to a certain amount depending on the ownership type of the account. Should a bank need to be taken over for some reason because they're not able to perform, they essentially, the FDIC would come in and cover it. So again, a lot of times I have this conversation with people and say, what's really important to you right now as far as risk and reward? FDIC is a great tool for stability, but I would also look at banks and what their history is, and the stability in the community is really important to consider.
Ria, just to clarify, because I see this conversation a lot around freelancers and small business owners specifically who are using some of these online banks.
Yeah.
So is it an issue where they don't have that type of protection? Sometimes they don't. What should we be looking for, I think is the better
Yeah.
question when choosing a bank.
That's a great conversation that small business owners should definitely be having as far as the risk and the reward, right? So a lot of people say that the convenience to integrate or the convenience to have an online bank is worth the risk to them. I definitely think that if you are on a website, you should really dig into who is actually offering that FDIC insurance if that's something you're concerned about. The other thing that I always just say is it's really easy to bank online when things are good. Just consider if you have a dispute or you're having a hard time tracking something down, do you have a plan in place of how you're going to handle that? I know small businesses do it, but the time involved in trying to get to a person or trying to research something that went awry, I think that's something that small business owners should definitely consider. And some people say it's worth it, right? And other people are like, that's not something that I want to do. So I think it's also people's comfortability with tech. There's some small business owners, right? That's all they do. They live and breathe it. And so they're much more in tune to what's happening. And then I think there's others who maybe they just don't jump into the deep end right away. Yeah.
So I want to turn the conversation here a little bit, maybe talk about some of your personal finances as much as you're
Yeah.
willing to share. I know that you did a bit of a house hack when you purchased your house a little bit. And then you also had an investment that was purchased to be a flow and you turned it into a flood.
Yeah. I love that you're talking about people's personal financial stories. In fact, Tony, I think you mentioned this on a previous podcast. I went through the majority of the Wacom Dream project program. And so in the Wacom Dream, this is like a class that you can take. I think it's about 8 weeks. You go in person, there's a workbook. They structure all of these activities. You order your credit report and all of that. So there was a week where we just reflected on our money stories and our money history. And so it was interesting during that time, I thought about how I grew up with the idea of just having W-2 income, just working at a business and just having a paycheck every month. And then Tony comes along and tells me I have to read Rich Dad Poor Dad to understand that there's other options out there. And so from there, I had a roommate who was paying me a little bit of rent. And so that definitely helped with my mortgage payment. And I highly recommend that people consider the options, short term, long term, things like that. But then I also started seeing Tony and his brother in the real estate market. And I was curious and I was asking a lot of questions. What do they have? How does it work? And there was a shop that came up for sale. And so I decided to dip my toe in the real estate market and took over that shop. I rented it for 3 years. And then I decided that I wanted to take that leverage elsewhere. So I sold it and turned it into a little bit of a flood for me. So that was a great experience. Yeah.
Yeah.
I'm
And
applauding.
yeah, and it's one of
Amazing.
those things that I think people need to understand. They say, I don't want to be a landlord or whatever the thing is that they don't want to do. And I get it. Trust me, being a landlord is, especially when it's self-managed, is far from a passive investment. But it doesn't have to be forever. And I think Ria's story is a good example of that she bought it. And when you buy a piece of real estate, you're trying to most of the time make money. Maybe you're buying it just for a flood if you're going to flip it or do something like that. Or maybe you're buying it just for appreciation if you're going to live in it. And I think we're going to really dive into that subject in a future episode. But if you're buying it as a rental, when I look at it, I want my rents and I want my appreciation. And what Ria did is, yes, she got the rents, and I assume that was covering the mortgage sort of thing and maybe paying down a little bit of principal. But generally, when you first get into a property, you're not getting a ton of cash flow out of it. But she really benefited from the appreciation in a pretty short period of time. So some of these investments, you can look at them and they don't have to be forever. They can be where you get into it for a little while, get out, and then you can redeploy your money elsewhere. And Ria, I know you took some of that money and you paid off some other debt, which essentially just your cash flow, you improved your cash flow by doing that.
Yeah. I paid off my car, which was fabulous. Not having a car payment, so good. And I think, Tony, the other thing that really did for me is prior to purchasing the shop, I really considered, and I was also doing home equity lines of credit. So I got to have those conversations a lot. And I realized it's a really great product that a lot of people don't understand or don't feel comfortable with. And so I started looking at it and I started looking at my monthly finance to say, how much of a payment would I be comfortable with? What does this look like? And so I had actually had my home equity line of credit in place maybe a year, maybe 2 years prior, and was like, I just have this line sitting not advanced just in case an opportunity comes up. So I had already done that part, which made when the shop came available, I had already mentally built some confidence that I could do it. And then doing that for 3 years, I really built some confidence of now I understand what kind of payment I feel comfortable with. And luckily, I had a great experience with renters. I never had issues trying to collect payments, so I never had to carry the payment myself. But I had already mentally worked through what would that look like. And so for a lot of people, I think they don't know where to start because the actionable item seems find a property. And I think the actionable item is start looking at your finances, start looking at your monthly and start just putting away a payment that feels comfortable to you in a savings account or however. Start looking at lending options, start having those conversations with mortgage lenders to say, how does this work? What paperwork would I need? Because putting that in place is going to help you when an opportunity comes in the future.
That's fantastic. Can you explain what a HELOC or a home equity line of credit is like? I'm a HELOC junkie.
Yeah.
I love the product.
Yeah. So essentially what happens is generally people have a first mortgage. That's how they get into their property, right? And you're paying it down over 15, 20, 30 years. As you pay it down, you have equity become available. So our general guideline usually is 80%. So you would take your approximate home value. Generally, I look at like the tax assessor's website and something like Zillow, and I average between the two. And there's obviously a much more extensive process once you get into the lending application. But in generality, you would take 80% of that and then you would minus your first mortgage. And that gives you an idea of what equity might be available. From there, people can apply for home equity line of credit. And that would allow them, it's like a line of credit off of their house. So you secure it with your home, but you can advance it and pay it back over generally a 10-year period. Say you wanted to advance for $25,000 this month and say you had a flood come in for $30,000, you pay that off. You're only paying interest on that amount. And people get nervous with that, right? Am I going to hold this for 10 years? And the reality is there's also options to fix it into a longer fixed rate term loan. So you know that it's going to get paid off in 7 years or 8 years and you're paying principal and interest. So a lot of flexibility. I hate to compare it to this, but it's like a credit card attached to your house.
Yeah, but it's a much lower rate
Yeah.
than a credit card would be.
Yeah.
And it can be on your primary residence or it can be on an investment property. And now the rate, you're going to get a better rate on your primary than you are on an investment property.
Yep.
And then, yes, that's correct. You only have to make interest only payments. And I think that's probably for another discussion. Maybe we'll have to have you on in the future, Ria, to go in a little further into what all those pieces mean. But the big thing that I like about it is it gives a lot of flexibility and to however you want to deploy that money and tap into some of that value that you have in the house. One of the last things I'd like to chat about, if you're okay sharing, is why do you have this fiscal mindset that you have? What got you to this point as you were growing up that really made finance an important part of your life?
Sure. That's a great question. And it's an interesting question because I only know my own experience. I don't see myself as the top tier financially savvy, right? I see myself as a learner that's in the middle of everything, but I grew up in a small rural town. And so my parents went through some financial struggles really early on in their journey because of medical situation. And so I definitely, in my family, we watched things, we budgeted things, we were very aware of how much things cost, which I think was really impactful to me. And it makes me love tracking. It makes me love asking questions about how things could work. And it definitely makes me see the resilience of my parents and how dedicated they were to figuring things out. I think it's very impressive just how committed they stayed to the long-term goal. They're in a great spot now, so I appreciate their dedication to that. But I think since that time, early on at the bank, I realized as a teller, as customers are coming and going, that appearance means nothing, right? There's individuals coming in that look like they have it all together and are having a hard time. And there's other individuals that look like they're having a hard time and they really have it together. So I think that just like those experiences for me really reiterated that everyone should keep their eyes on their own paper and focus on systems and goals that work for them. Like the best system is the system that you use. And I think that more people could really take that to heart to stop trying to search for a perfect system or something you're gonna get rich quick and things like that. And just really say, okay, where am I at and where do I want to go?
I love what you just said, Ria, because my husband and I have a joke where we were in a furniture store one time looking like forest trolls. And no one came over to us to even ask if we needed help. But we had a bunch of cash on hand, like ready to purchase right there. We're going to make a great purchase. And we just thought that was so interesting that we had to hunt down a sales just because of that. So that definitely reminded me of the not judging on appearance. And then also, I love what you said about you think of yourself as a learner, because really the marker of a great leader is a great learner. Kudos to you that you're always in that mindset of learning and soaking in that knowledge, because obviously that makes you really great at what you do.
Thank you. Yeah. It's fun to talk about. And I definitely hope that people walk away with the inspiration to talk to other people, ask questions, just be curious.
Yeah, you have. The whole time I've known you, you've been one of the best learners I've known, and you'll often recommend. And I like to read. I read a lot, and I listen to podcasts. And Ria somehow consumes more than I do, and so sometimes I have her give me the cliff notes.
That's a lot, because you're always consuming.
I consume a lot, but Ria is a beast consumer. It's unbelievable. And then she consumes, and then she actually puts it into action, which is really impressive too.
That is
Thank
impressive.
Ria, is there anything else you want to share? I have really enjoyed having you here. I'm sure the listeners have taken away just some sheer gold. I imagine we're probably going to get some questions that either we'll follow up with in a episode, or maybe we'll have you back to answer some of those questions.
Yeah, I would be happy to. And I love the conversation we've had. Also, maybe just the general disclosure that I talked about a variety of products. I tried to keep it very general to the industry, and that I'm not recommending everything for everyone, or not saying that I spoke perfectly about every product. Any questions that people have, I highly recommend they talk to their local community banker. They do their research. And like you said, Tony, I'm happy to answer more questions.
Thank you so much, Ria.
Thank you so much, Ria. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
All right. And for everybody else, thank you so much for joining us on the Drip, Trickle, Flow, Flood podcast. What an amazing episode, which I'm sure you probably all have a ton of notes, because I know I do. I was taking notes the entire time. And if you like this episode, please feel free to rate and review. And until next time, we'll see you soon.